Hi guys, in this video I'm going to go through an analysis of the poem Kamikaze, and the first thing that we need to do is just understand the context, the form, the attitudes and links to other poems. So the first thing is the context, and the context is that a kamikaze is a Japanese World War II suicide pilot, and Japanese children were taught to worship and show obedience to the emperor. And it was ceremonial suicide that was considered the greatest act of man. And if the person failed, he was hugely dishonored. And also, they carried a samurai sword to kill themselves if they didn't die through their plane crashing, and they were regarded as national heroes. So, that is the context. So, the next thing that we look at is the form of the poem. And the form of this poem is that it's written in third person. Now, when we look and when we read this poem, the third person narrator is actually the daughter. And what happens is that in the poem, it's like her views, and we don't really hear the voice of the man, the father, so the person who went on the mission. And it could show off that he's been cut off from society because of him failing the mission, and it's just showing the extent of how much he has dishonored his people, that he's just been cut out. He's not even in the poem. His views, his thoughts and everything, as in his first person perspective, that's not here. The next thing we look at is the attitudes in the poem, and the main three attitudes are patriotism, shame and regret. So those are the three main attitudes. And when we think about linking to other poems, we can link this to Poppies, Checking Out My History and The Prelude. Now, these are the only ones you can compare to. It depends what you're comparing it because of power, power of nature, effects of war, things like that. So these are just three that I think that are quite important. So here are the first few things we need to take into account before we start analysing: the context, the form of the poem, the attitudes in the poem, and links to other poems. Again, these are not the only poems you can link to, but they're just key ones that you should remember. Now, one more thing we need to do before we begin to annotate is we need to summarize the poem, or at least understand what's going on. So just quickly, this poem is about a kamikaze pilot who is setting off for his suicide mission. However, he does not complete his mission. And when he comes home, his family acts as if he's not alive, or he doesn't even exist. So that's just a very, very quick overview of the poem, so you understand it. And the first quote, now we're going to start. The first quote that I'm going to go through is this one right here. Now, this quote says, "A samurai sword." And if we just look before it and after it, it's like listing. So, a flask of water, samurai sword, in the cockpit, a shaven head full of powerful incantation. So it's like quite a lot of listing. And also, if we remember about the context that we just went over, the kamikaze pilots kept a samurai sword with them. If they didn't finish the mission and they didn't die, they had to kill themselves. So this is listing, and it portrays their strong cultural beliefs and their family heritage. And once again, if they didn't finish the mission, this is what they had with them to kill themselves with. So that's the first quote that I would pick in this poem. Remember, as I always say, these are not the only quotes you can zoom in on. There are plenty of quotes and plenty of analysis you can do. You don't have to use, these are not the only ones. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at, the next quote, is just underneath. So it's in the same stanza, but on the last line. So it says, "One-way journey into history." Now, this is irony, because we don't know if he actually makes history. Does he actually complete the mission and die and in the mission? So does he actually make the history? Is he honoring his emperor? So does he go through with the mission, or does he fail? So that's the question here. So it's irony. And also, I think that we should zoom in on the one way, because it's highlighting how the journey is only to go and to not come back. So there's honor in going and dying for your country, but if you come back, it's not an option. So that's one of the key things. I think you should zoom in on this and talk about how there's a plan to complete the mission at the beginning. So that is what I would write for these 2 quotes at the beginning. And now we're going to look at the next quote. So this quote says, "Like a huge flag waved first one way." And I think that this is quite a key quote in this poem. First of all, we know it's a simile. And flag, the word flag, is indicating that he's going on this mission, and he's going to die for his country. However, his death for the country will be covered up by a flag, and it's kind of like death is approaching him. So again, there's a theme of patriotism, that he's dying for his country, and he's on the suicide mission. He's honoring the emperor. He's obedient to the emperor. All these kind of things. So now when we look at this quote, we know that it's a simile. And here we've written, "Death will be covered up by flag." So his death is going to be covered up by this flag. It's symbolizing how dying for your country is more important than caring about your own death. So the country is more important than your life. So the flag is symbolizing the patriotism, which is why there's a theme of it that's kind of implemented in this poem here, like quite often. And as we go on through the poem, the death is approaching him. So here's the next quote that we're going to look at, and it says, "Flashing silver as their bellies swivel towards the sun." Now, this is about the fish who are in the sea underneath, and there's sibilance here, and it's highlighting the unity of the fish in contrast with the loneliness of the kamikaze pilot. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that he might be reflecting on his family, because he's alone in his his airplane, or his what he's in, and his family's at home together as one. So he might be reflecting on his family as well as comparing the unity of the fish and his loneliness. He's also looking at his family's unity. So here's the next quote. It says, "Cairns of pearl grey pebbles." Now, the first thing we need to understand from here is what the words actually mean. So we know what pearl and grey mean. Cairns is a memorial. So already there are connotations of death, and pearl grey is juxtaposition, because pearls connote shiny things and peace. However, grey is like quite dull, and it could also connote death. So there's juxtaposition there between pearl grey and also the cairns part of it. So one thing I would say here is that there's a lot of juxtaposition, and it could symbolize the inner conflict that's going on within the kamikaze pilot. If he wants to die, if he doesn't want to die, there's lots of conflicting feelings here. Death is approaching him, but he doesn't really want to die. So he's seeing his daughter is imagining that he didn't complete the mission because of the way that he saw the beauty of nature, and he remembered his innocent childhood, because there are references to his brothers, and he's reflecting on family quite a lot. So it could symbolize his inner conflict, which is why this juxtaposition is here, because his death is awaiting him. There is a one-way route, he cannot come back, but he's also thinking of pearls, so could remember his family, the innocent childhood, and so that's what it means. Now the next quote is just underneath, and that is this one. And it says turbulent inrush. And again, this is symbolizing his inner conflict, because when he's in the plane, he's questioning himself. He's becoming frantic. He's thinking about his childhood, and he's trying to keep himself calm. So there's a lot of inner conflict going on here as death is approaching him. So at this moment in time, he's back in the plane. So he's come out of the kind of zone of remembering his childhood. He's back in the plane. He's questioning himself. He's trying to stay calm, because we know that he knows that death is coming, and he's becoming frantic. So there's an inrush, turbulent inrush. That's what it's highlighting. So that's another key quote. Another quote that I think is very important, I think is very easy to explain as well, is this one. So it says cloud marked mackerel. And there's a lot of plosives here. So the C, the D, actually it's not, the C is not a plosive. So K, and there's D as well. So the plosives here are connoting that death is on his mind. And it could symbolize the sound of the explosives. So when the plane blows up, that's what it could symbolize or highlight. And again, we're going further on in the poem, so death is approaching him even more. So that is a very key quote that I think you should remember, one of the main ones. Now the next one is at the end of this stanza, and it's this one. So a tuner, the dark prince, muscular, dangerous. Now the first thing we can see here is that there's listing. So this could potentially highlight that he's so terrified he can't talk calmly, so he's struggling for breath. That's what is mirroring his incapability to talk calmly, to keep himself calm. He's so frantic that all these words are just flicking through his mind, and he wants to say everything in one go, so he's scared. And he's trying to distract himself, but he can't, because death is literally right there. Now, we can also see at the end of this, there's a full stop. And that is the first full stop in the whole poem. And it symbolizes that Kamikaze has come to a conclusion. Because if we look at the next line, it says, and though he came back, my mother never spoke again. So that full stop there symbolizes that he has stopped the mission, he has made his conclusion, and he's come back. So he failed the mission. So this is the next quote that I just wanted to look at. It says, as though he no longer existed. So he's made his decision, his conclusion of all the inner conflict, and he's come back. However, he's being treated as if he does not exist. Now this is irony, because he's not dead, he's treated as if he's dead. And this could also be a form of inner conflict, because he could be running in his mind the thought of, you know what, maybe it was better if I died in that mission instead of facing my family. Now here I've just added patriotism versus family, and I've written that because it's between him dying for his country and his family. So he came back because he remembered his childhood and the beauty of nature. So his inner conflict is between fighting for his country or his family. So that's another key point of explanation you should have for this quote. And the last quote I'm going to go through is the last one in the poem. And it says, he must have wondered which had been the better way to die. Now, the first thing we need to look at is the fact that throughout this whole poem, we've been coming up to death. And the last word is, in fact, die. So that's very key, and it's a violent verb, and it's used right at the end because death has been building up throughout this whole poem, and it's mentioned right at the end. So that's quite key. Now, if we notice, there's enjambment here, and it's not just here, it's been going on throughout the whole poem. Yeah, and I think that here is quite key because his inner conflict was constantly bugging him on the inside, and this could symbolize that, it could highlight that. And it's also you could also say that he would have wanted to be killed now because his family hate him for being a coward. So it's just dragging on and it's dragging on, and his family are letting him live his life by questioning him. So all of this inner conflict has not ended, and die would have been his best option, so to die. And the enjambment is quite key here for that reason. So that is the explanation for the last quote. Remember to just zoom in on the word die, it's quite important, and the enjambment. I also think that is quite important because, as we said at the beginning, the actual pilot, his view, so it's not first person perspective from him anywhere in this poem. It's just he must have wondered. So his actual views are not given. And again, this could highlight how he's been cut off from society because he's done such a dishonorable act. So that's one of the key contextual points you can link in at the end of your paragraphs. Just to get those marks. And also, we need to look at the theme of patriotism, which is also throughout the poem. And we need to look at the inner conflict as well. So those are the three key things you need to take away from this poem. So that was Kamikaze by Beatrice Garland. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Thank you very much for watching.